Carol Burnett made the world laugh for over a decade, but what she finally confessed left fans stunned. For years, her chemistry with Harvey Korman looked flawless. Every sketch, every laugh, every blooper. Yet, behind those smiles, Carol was hiding a secret. She didn't always love working with Harvey. In fact, at times, she truly hated it. She held her silence for decades, protecting the show's image, protecting his reputation. But when she finally told the truth, it revealed a side of their partnership that no one expected, and it changed the way fans saw her forever. When the Carol Burnett Show first hit television in the late 1960s, it felt like lightning in a bottle. Carol Burnett wasn't just another performer, she was the face of a new kind of comedy, one that blended sharp parody with warmth and heart. At her side, from the very beginning, was Harvey Korman, a tall, commanding figure with impeccable timing. Together, they became the backbone of the series. The duo audiences counted on week after week to deliver laughter that felt effortless. On screen, their chemistry looked perfect. Carol's expressive, elastic humor balanced Harvey's more rigid, dignified style. He could play the pompous professor, the frustrated husband, or the over-the-top villain, while Carol undercut him with a glance, a pratfall, or a sly line. To the millions of Americans watching every Saturday night, it seemed like they must have been the closest of friends behind the scenes. But reality was different. Carol was not just the star of the show, she was its leader. Her name was on the marquee, and that meant she bore the responsibility for everything that went wrong. The pressure was constant. Every script, every sketch, every performance had to hold up. And behind the curtain, Harvey could be unpredictable. He was brilliant, but he was also difficult. His ego sometimes filled the room as much as his talent did. He could argue with writers, ignore directors, and even walk away in frustration if he didn't like how things were going. For Carol, this wasn't just a nuisance, it was exhausting. She was trying to build something historic, a female-led variety show in prime time, a feat no other woman had managed to sustain. But while she smiled on camera and laughed with Harvey in front of the audience, there were times she left the stage seething. She later admitted that she sometimes hated working with him. The word was shocking to fans who adored their partnership, but for Carol it was the truth she had lived with for years. What made it even more complicated was that Harvey's genius couldn't be denied. The very sketches that caused Carol so much stress in rehearsal often ended up being the ones audiences loved most. When he finally clicked into place, especially in those famous moments with Tim Conway, the result was comedy magic. Carol knew she couldn't simply replace him. His presence gave the show much of its bite, even if it also caused her headaches. By the early 70s, this duality had become the heartbeat of the show. To the public, Carol and Harvey looked like the perfect pair. Offstage, Carol was constantly managing the tension between admiration and frustration. She respected him, but she also bore the brunt of his moods. She carried it quietly, never letting the audience suspect a thing. And that silence was its own kind of performance. Week after week, Carol put her feelings aside to keep the show alive. She endured Harvey's volatility, shielded her cast and crew from the worst of it, and still delivered laughter to millions of homes. For the audience, her joy seemed boundless. For Carol, it was often an act of survival. Decades later, when she finally spoke openly about those years, fans were stunned. The image they'd clung to, the warm, seamless friendship between Carol and Harvey, wasn't the whole truth. What Carol revealed was that their partnership, as legendary as it looked, was forged in tension as much as in joy. And that tension nearly reached a breaking point. As the Carol Burnett Show settled into the early 70s, its success was undeniable. Ratings were strong, critics were glowing, and the chemistry between Carol and Harvey looked bulletproof. Yet, behind the curtain, Carol was facing a battle few outside the studio ever suspected. The problem wasn't talent, Harvey Korman had that in spades. The problem was ego. Harvey had built a reputation as one of the sharpest sketch actors in the business. He could transform himself instantly into a stuffy aristocrat, a bumbling everyman, or a conniving villain, and audiences would erupt in laughter. But that brilliance often came with arrogance. He sometimes clashed with the writers, dismissing sketches he thought were beneath him. He could push back on directors, insisting his instincts were better. And when frustration boiled over, Harvey had been known to storm out of rehearsals, leaving the cast and crew stranded until he cooled down. For Carol, who carried the weight of keeping the show steady, these moments were infuriating. She had fought hard to prove a woman could lead a primetime variety show, and now she found herself managing not only the sketches and the scripts, but also the moods of her leading man. In those days, few women in Hollywood had the authority Carol possessed, but with authority came responsibility. She couldn't let the public see the cracks. The audience expected laughter, not conflict. Still, the tension grew impossible to ignore. By the mid-70s, Carol herself admitted she was reaching her limit. Harvey's behavior was putting strain not only on her, but on the entire team. Tim Conway, who joined as a regular in 1975, often diffused the tension with his antics, making Harvey laugh uncontrollably in sketches that went off script. But even Tim's humor couldn't erase the fact that Carol was carrying the burden of keeping Harvey in line. There was one rehearsal, Carol later revealed, where Harvey's temper finally pushed her too far. He had argued over the material, belittled the process, and walked away in defiance. Carol, normally calm and composed, snapped. She pulled him aside and told him bluntly, if he didn't shape up, he could leave the show. It was the kind of confrontation few women in television would have dared in that era. The series was already a cultural landmark, and Harvey's role was central to it. To threaten to let him go was a risk that could have backfired spectacularly. But Carol meant it. She had endured his moods for years, protected his reputation, and kept the peace for the sake of the audience. Yet she knew the show couldn't survive if the atmosphere backstage collapsed completely. For the first time, she let Harvey see just how close he was to losing everything. The confrontation stunned him. Instead of fighting back, Harvey broke down. Carol described how he suddenly seemed smaller, stripped of his arrogance. He admitted he didn't want to lose his place on the show, and from that point forward, his behavior improved. It wasn't perfect. Harvey would always be strong-willed, but the balance of power had shifted. Carol had finally shown him that even the most gifted performer wasn't above the discipline of the show's leader. For Carol, it was a turning point. She realized that leadership didn't always mean keeping the peace at all costs. Sometimes it meant standing her ground, even against the co-star audiences loved. For Harvey, it was a lesson in humility. For the show, it was a moment that preserved its survival. But Carol's choice to keep this story private until much later left fans in the dark for decades. They saw only the laughter, never the confrontation, that nearly ended Harvey's place in television history. And when she finally told it, the revelation left people stunned because it proved that even comedy's golden duo had nearly come undone. By the time the Carol Burnett Show entered its later seasons in the mid-70s, Carol had learned how to manage Harvey. The explosive confrontation where she told him to shape up or leave had left its mark. Harvey reined himself in, at least more than before, but the scars of their working relationship didn't vanish. Carol admitted much later that there were stretches where she truly hated working with him. The word was strong, but it captured the exhaustion of leading a team where one of the brightest lights could also be the hardest to handle. And yet, if you watched the show during those years, you'd never suspect it. Carol and Harvey were still knocking audiences over with sketches like The Old Folks, their soap opera parody, As the Stomach Turns, and countless movie spoofs that became part of television history. They played husband and wife, rivals, lovers, or clueless friends, and the laughter felt effortless. That was by Carol's design. She believed the audience should never see backstage tension. Protecting the illusion was part of her responsibility as the star. To admit that Harvey's behavior had worn her down, to reveal that the laughter sometimes came through clenched teeth, would have risked the entire show's image. Variety television was fragile. If word leaked that the stars were feuding, advertisers could panic, critics could pounce, and CBS executives might have lost faith. Carol had fought too hard to get the show in the first place to let that happen. So she kept the truth hidden. Publicly, she praised Harvey as a genius, a partner she couldn't imagine the show without. Privately, she struggled to navigate the tension. Cast members like Vicki Lawrence noticed Harvey's moods, but Carol bore the brunt of it. She smoothed things over, kept the machine moving, and swallowed her own frustration for the sake of survival. It was a mask she wore for more than a decade. What made this silence even more remarkable was the cultural moment. In the 70s, few women in Carol's position had the freedom to speak openly about workplace conflict, especially when it involved a male co-star. Admitting publicly that Harvey was difficult could have easily been turned against her, painted as hysterical or ungrateful. Instead, Carol carried the weight quietly, proving her strength in silence as much as in confrontation. The truth remained buried long after the show ended in 1978. For decades, fans assumed Carol and Harvey were as close in real life as they appeared on stage. The reunion specials, the reruns, and the nostalgia all reinforced the myth of perfect harmony. Carol let that myth stand. Not because it was entirely false, she did care for Harvey, and they shared countless laughs, but because the full truth would have shocked the audience that still adored them. It wasn't until years later, in moments of reflection, that Carol finally admitted the truth. She acknowledged how hard it had been, how much Harvey's ego had cost her emotionally, and how close their partnership had come to unraveling. The revelation stunned fans who had grown up idolizing their chemistry. Suddenly, the laughter of the 70s looked different. Still genuine in many ways, but layered with tension no one had seen at the time. Carol's decision to keep the truth hidden for so long wasn't weakness. It was strategy. By doing so, she preserved the show's legacy, allowed Harvey to be remembered for his brilliance rather than his flaws, and protected the millions of fans who cherished their memories of Saturday night laughter. But once she finally spoke, it redefined how people understood her. She was not just the woman who smiled through every sketch. She was the woman who endured, managed, and sacrificed in ways the audience never realized. For decades after the Carol Burnett Show ended in 1978, Carol kept the truth close to her chest. Fans saw only the reruns, the reunion specials, and the nostalgic tributes. Harvey Korman was remembered as her brilliant sidekick, the man whose pompous characters and uncontrollable laughter became part of television history. Carol, gracious as ever, let that image stand. She chose silence over scandal, protecting Harvey's reputation long after the cameras stopped rolling. But time changes perspective. As Carol grew older, and as tributes to her career began to highlight her legacy, she started opening up about the reality behind the laughter. In interviews and memoirs, she finally admitted what had been true all along, that Harvey Korman was not always easy to work with. In fact, at times, she hated it. The word startled people who had built their memories around the idea of a perfect partnership. For the first time, the cracks in the golden image were exposed. What made this revelation so powerful was not bitterness, but honesty. Carol didn't dwell on Harvey's flaws to tear him down. Instead, she explained the burden she had carried as the leader of a pioneering television show. She wanted the world to understand that comedy greatness often comes with personal sacrifice. Behind every legendary sketch was a woman managing egos, soothing tempers, and keeping the magic alive under enormous pressure. The impact of her honesty was immediate. Fans, rather than turning away, admired her more. They saw her not just as a comedian, but as a leader who endured challenges no one ever realized. Her story gave a new dimension to her legacy. She wasn't simply America's clown princess. She was a trailblazer who navigated difficult relationships while breaking barriers for women in television. For Harvey's legacy, the effect was complicated. He had passed away in 2008, remembered as one of the funniest sketch actors of his generation. Carol's late-life honesty didn't erase his brilliance, but it added nuance. People now saw him as both a genius and a challenge. A man who could deliver comedy gold, but also push those around him to the breaking point. In a way, it made his performances even more fascinating. Fans rewatched the sketches with new eyes, wondering how much of the tension behind the scenes seeped into the laughter on screen. Carol's truth also sparked broader conversations about what it takes to create art under pressure. The assumption that comedy is born from pure joy was shattered. Instead, audiences began to understand that conflict, tension, and even resentment can fuel creativity in unexpected ways. The very sketches that nearly drove Carol to her limit are now seen as masterpieces of television history. By finally speaking out, Carol reframed her own narrative. She showed that telling the truth after years of silence could liberate not only herself, but also the story of the show. Her willingness to admit that she sometimes hated working with Harvey didn't diminish the joy they created. If anything, it deepened it. It reminded fans that comedy is not effortless, that even the most beloved partnerships are forged in struggle. And for Carol personally, there was a sense of closure. She had spent years protecting Harvey's image, keeping her frustrations private. Once she shared the truth, she no longer had to carry that burden. She could finally celebrate the show's legacy without pretending it had been flawless. Her honesty was not cruel, but cathartic. It was the final act of a performer who had built a career on making others laugh, even when it cost her peace of mind. By revealing the truth, Carol gave fans not just laughter, but respect for the resilience it took to bring that laughter into their homes. Looking back, it's hard to imagine the Carol Burnett Show without Harvey Korman. His characters, his timing, even his bursts of laughter when Tim Conway pushed him off script, became the moments audiences still replay decades later. For millions of Americans, Harvey was as essential to the show as Carol herself. And yet, knowing the truth that Carol later revealed that working with him was often a trial, that she sometimes hated the very partnership that defined her career, casts the legacy of the show in a more complicated light. Fans have debated this revelation ever since. Could Carol have replaced him? Would the show have succeeded without Harvey's towering presence? In one sense, the answer is no. His contributions were too distinct, too central to the show's identity. In another sense, the answer is yes, because Carol's genius and leadership would have shown regardless. That paradox is what makes their partnership so fascinating. It was both indispensable and unbearable, both magical and maddening. For Carol, the memory of those years is layered. She has acknowledged the difficulties, but she has also spoken with warmth about Harvey's brilliance. That mixture of frustration and forgiveness captures the complexity of creative partnerships. Love and hate are not opposites in these environments. They often exist side by side. Carol could despise Harvey's behavior one moment, then marvel at his delivery the next. It was that tension, in many ways, that gave their sketches an extra charge. The audience didn't know it, but they were watching real friction being transformed into comedy. This duality also reshaped Carol's own legacy. For years, she was celebrated as a gifted comedienne, a trailblazer who made audiences laugh while breaking barriers for women in television. By finally revealing what she endured with Harvey, she added another layer: the image of a leader who held her show together under enormous pressure. Fans began to see her not just as the smiling star of Saturday night, but as the strong woman who managed egos, shielded her team, and carried the weight of conflict while still delivering joy. As for Harvey, his legacy remains both glowing and complicated. His death in 2008 prompted tributes that celebrated his comedic brilliance. The sketches with Carol, Tim Conway, and Vicki Lawrence are still regarded as some of the finest ever broadcast. But Carol's honesty added a shadow that can't be ignored. He was a genius, yes, but also a man whose ego nearly derailed one of television's greatest shows. That doesn't erase his accomplishments. If anything, it makes them more human. Audiences now understand that his brilliance came with flaws, and that the very tension he created was part of what fueled the magic. In the end, the truth Carol revealed didn't diminish the show's greatness. It deepened it. It reminded fans that the comedy they loved wasn't born in a vacuum. It came from long hours, high stakes, and difficult personalities. It came from Carol Burnett's ability to hold everything together, even when she wanted to walk away. And it came from Harvey Korman's ability to make people laugh, even when he was behind the scenes, driving his colleagues to the brink. Today, when fans revisit the Carol Burnett Show, they do so with new eyes. They see the joy, but they also see the resilience. They see not only the sketches, but the struggles behind them. And perhaps that makes the laughter even more meaningful, because now they understand what it cost. Carol's decision to finally tell the truth gave her freedom, but it also gave her fans something just as valuable: perspective. Comedy is not always born from joy. Sometimes it comes from conflict, tension, even hatred transformed into art. And that is the true legacy of Carol Burnett and Harvey Korman. A partnership defined not just by what it gave to television, but by what it demanded of those who made it possible. Carol Burnett and Harvey Korman made America laugh in ways that still echo today. Their sketches became part of television's golden age, symbols of a time when families gathered around the screen to share in pure comedy. But what Carol finally revealed pulled back the curtain on a truth no one expected. The laughter wasn't always effortless. At times, it was born from frustration, tension, and even resentment. By admitting that she sometimes hated working with Harvey, Carol didn't destroy their legacy, she enriched it. She showed fans that greatness often comes at a cost, that the joy they saw on screen was the product of endurance, strength, and leadership few fully appreciated at the time. Harvey remains remembered for his brilliance, but now his flaws are part of the story too. In the end, Carol's honesty made her legacy stronger. She was not just the woman who smiled through the pain, but the one who carried a groundbreaking show on her shoulders and still gave the world laughter. For more emotional stories, check out this video.